Good day. Today we're discussing the value of wilderness, and I have with me 4 guests. The first is Herb Hammond, forest ecologist and author. The second is Paul Piro, who's representing the West Arm Wilderness Group. The third is Colleen McCrory, representing the Valhalla Society. And the last is Paul Duryea, who's with Guiding Hands. And I'll just start the show by sketching the format that we're going to use today. First of all, I'm going to ask each of them what group they represent and basically why are they here? What's their interest and what is it that is propelling them to take a substantial chunk of their creative spirit and energy and time and come here today and talk to us. The second part of our show is on what is the problem. We can talk all we like about politicking our way through to solutions, and they're each going to give us their views today about what the problem is. And the last part of the show, we'll all talk together about what kinds of solutions there are. So without further ado, just open it up over to Herb.
Thank you. Well, as I have worked in the forest for many years, I've come to learn that forests sustain us, we don't sustain the forest. And with that has come a couple of realizations to me. That's that the way we relate to forests has little to do with how forests function and how they operate. And quite simply, unless we change that relationship with forests, I think that we will have more problems than just a few lost logging jobs or communities in turmoil. So my interest in all of this is helping people develop a new, perhaps an old way of relating to forests and thinking about forests. And I describe that as holistic forest use. A key part of that is wilderness, is maintaining a part of the forest that is untouched by human hands and human influence. Other than the very softest of human uses, it becomes a place to reconnect with what we once were, and that was very clearly part of a forest. So I do what I do. I hope to maybe help parts of the forest who can't speak for themselves be heard in our human society.
Thank you. And Paul, would you mind telling us what you're here for?
The West Arm Wilderness Group came about as a public response to an incredible pressure on one of the last wilderness areas in the West Arm of Kootenay Lake. The Lasca Creek area is, was an unroaded wilderness up until last October. And there's a large group of people that feel that the wilderness on a global level is very threatened at this time. And that right here in our backyard is an area that needs some protection. It needs to be studied before it is put into a development plan that doesn't take into consideration a lot of wilderness and other social values.
Thank you. Colleen, the floor is yours.
I think my interest, I've been working on wilderness and forest issues for about 17 years, most of my adult life, and I've grown up in the Kootenays, and not only work in the Kootenays but across the country with several other people. Herb, I know Peter's very involved, and a number of other people in all kinds of communities across this nation. And I think the most fundamental message that I like to give is that we are perhaps the last generation that can set aside large wilderness areas. And many of those areas that are left, whatever we're going to save, if you want to call it, or use the word save, or set aside, these natural treasures And at one time, most places on Earth were natural treasures until we started to exploit those areas, those few remnants we have left, and many of those remnants are in British Columbia. And I think we have some of the last and finest and most spectacular, magnificent forests left in the world in this country. And I believe it's going to take a major effort to, and it has taken a major effort, a very, very painful, difficult road for many people working on these issues. But recognizing that what we set aside in the next few years is what has taken eons of time to create. And those areas that we do get set aside is what generations for hundreds and hundreds of years down the road will have. And I look at areas like Lasca Creek in the Kootenays, or the White Grizzly proposal, or the various proposals we have throughout the province as our last opportunities to put those areas in preservation. And living museums are what they are. Mm-hmm. So those are the reasons I work on these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Peter.
Well, I have to agree with Colleen that the wilderness is really precious. That's why I've operated an educational camp on Kootenay Lake that depends on the forest base as kind of a background for people to learn some new attitudes. I feel like we're in the middle of a transition in the way we think and the way we feel and the way we relate to each other and the environment. We need to wake up more. My personal feeling now is that the way we're demonstrating our relationship to the planet as a whole, and wilderness in particular, is insane. It's like sitting on a limb and cutting it off while we're sitting on it and trying to sell it as we fall down to the ground. So unless we can use these wilderness areas, even semi-wilderness areas, to change our attitudes toward each other and towards our surroundings, the ways that we're doing things are proven to not work now, all over the world, socially, economically, environmentally, all the values. So we need to keep talking like this among friends and share what we know so that we can come up with some new ways of doing things.
Very true. Thank you. So now I guess we get to what I see as part of the fun parts of this, which is trying to talk about what the problems are about this, since the problems can arise on a political level, or on levels of process, or on levels of ecology, or smaller bits like biological considerations. So I'd like to ask each of you to talk a little bit about what you see as the problem or problems that greatly affect your work. Any order?
Well,
Go for it.
we're not putting any particular order here. In response to what Peter was just saying, I think that the West Arm Wilderness Group is an example of that type of birth, where people are becoming more conscious of the dire need to preserve wilderness. They are becoming more conscious of the imbalance that there is in the world, and by virtue of where we live, we exist here in this area where there still is some of that, and I personally feel very fortunate to be in that position. And I feel somewhat compelled, because I'm so close to wilderness, to spend time and energy in trying to preserve some of it, get areas set aside for study before they're developed. And it seems to me, if we're going to roll along, I'm sorry.
Okay, we can edit. It's okay.
Yeah,
Just thinking, does this whole way of talking about the stuff, is that working as we're now involved in it? Is this working for you guys? It seems a little difficult.
We're a little stiff.
Well, let me take a fling at the problem here for a second.
Okay.
I think the problem starts with us. I mean, everything worked fine on the earth, in the forest, in the ocean, before people became an organism that wasn't controlled by any other organisms. And the primary mechanism of our ability to think we're in control of other organisms has been technology. And so if you look at the philosophy of technology and you look what it's done for us, certainly there's no argument that appropriate technology has been can be and has been in certain places a benefit to both human beings and also the ecosystem that we're part of. But what got closely related to technology, unfortunately, wasn't technology for the good of the earth and for the good of people. What technology has come to mean is technology for the good of a few that control it and control other people, and most importantly, their goal to control the earth and its resources. So out of that came an era where we had this technological control, and the control by a very small but powerful group of people in the world, that the era seemed like it was okay, like it was going to benefit most people because we had low populations, still relatively low levels of pollution, and still relatively low levels of consumption. But now we have high levels of population, 5 billion going on 10. We have high levels of pollution that everyone recognizes. And thirdly, we have very high levels of consumption that literally, where human beings are behaving irrationally. We're behaving like we don't understand the reality that the frog doesn't drink up the pond in which he lives. And so we have created this dominant ethic called technology and consumption, and led people to believe that things can continually get better. We can always have more. Things will get better. And if there's problems, technology will fix it. Well, I think that scientists and philosophers have always known that wasn't true, but now we have a rebirth, if you want to look at it that way, of an ecological ethic, of an ethic where people see themselves to be more part of this system and more to be stewards of this system rather than exploiters of the system. And the problem arises in that this growing ethic of, you might call it an earth ethic, you can call it a land ethic, you can call it an ecosystem ethic. This growing ethic is now having to deal with the legacies and the remaining political and economic power of the technological ethic. And in practical terms, what that means is that if we want to protect more wilderness, it's very difficult because all the forests have been technologically and politically allocated to become logs. And so if we want to implement models where wilderness is part of more intelligent forest use, we can't implement those models because industrial timber companies control all the forests, either directly or indirectly. So and because that technological ethic, what went along with it, was for workers, for communities, that you could always have more. You could always have more in terms of material goods and wages and things. We now have a setup for a classical confrontation. If we change it, all of you guys lose your job. If we don't change it, the earth suffers and eventually jobs don't count. Well, you have a classical kind of short-term versus long-term argument on the surface, but all we have to do is walk out in the sun's rays in the Kootenays right now to realize that the long term is now here, and that if we don't find some way of resolving the conflict between these two ethics, of balancing the way we use forests and providing for not only all human uses, but all organisms in the forest, then the jobs versus wilderness argument becomes academic.
So as you see it, then is the problem a problem of lack of appropriate technology, or is the problem one of control and maybe consolidation of power, local or otherwise?
Well, the problem in a nutshell is finding our place in the forest. Is accepting the humility that technology cannot solve ecological processes. We are no more beyond energy flows that control the frogs than we are the sort of arrogance that we think we can shape it or remold it so the frog can swim in hydrochloric acid. I mean, we know that's a reality that we can't deal with, but we seem to not accept that about ourselves. The problem in a nutshell is that human arrogance has led us into a problem that says we can do whatever we want to and technology will figure out a way to fix it up. That's not true. I mean, we can't make air, we can't make water, we can't make energy. I mean, there are finite amounts of those basic building blocks of human life and of forests, and if we continue to degrade them, we will suffer the consequences and go the way of the dinosaur. So,
to be a bit of a devil's advocate about that, though, it does sound like a lot of energy, and certainly it's a very clean and kind of a sexy approach to things that way, to spend money on research and development, to do exactly that, to play God, if you like, or Godhead, or something there about making clean air. It's like part of that recycling movement, as opposed to trying to get out of what you earlier referred to as a thinking trap, which is changing the values that we place on things. And I see one is definitely more technologically fixated than another way, than looking for creative processes of using and fitting in rather than just straight using. Is that an accurate
well, I think
depiction?
we're looking for creative processes of using and fitting in, but I think that I think using and fitting in has to start from the ecosystem. It has to start with the fact that any way that we use the forest has to be ecologically responsible, and that means we have to keep all the parts. The best analogy is that we've probably all taken apart a watch or a clock and have all these springs and screws and levers and things sitting here in front of us, and then we go, okay, well, let's put it back together again. And you sort of look at the clock and you go, well, I don't know what this is for. So, but if you throw it away, you're going to get to a spot somewhere where you go, darn, I wish I had kept that spring because now I see where it fits. Well, what we're doing in forests every day, by the way we log, by the way we plan, by the way we carry out politics, is throwing springs away. And the only difference between the clock and the forest is that within a matter of hours or days, if you're a sleepy clockmaker, you figure out that the spring that you threw away was not a smart decision. But a forest operates on hundreds, thousands of years. And so a mistake, a part that we throw away today may not be seen for 2 human generations. The problem may not be seen for 2 human generations. And when we do see it, it's too late because it's gone. You don't create the species of bacteria that you exterminated. You don't create the bird that is now extinct. So those are problems that are way beyond technology.
Okay. So you're arguing for a strong case for conservation based on our lack of knowledge.
Let me give you one of the most simple reasons, or one of the most simple but compelling reasons for wilderness. We need a parts manual. We have been busily throwing away parts all over the place in our forests. We have thousands and thousands of square kilometers of degraded forest land. Some of them we call tree plantations, some of them we call naturally regenerated forests following clear cuts, some of them we call clear cuts. All of them are degraded forests. None of them do we really fully appreciate how they work. So if we're going to fix up the mess that we've been busily creating here for 40 years, we not only need old growth wilderness, we need wilderness like, for example, the Lasca Creek drainage is, where it's dominantly early successional to mid-successional kinds of forests. It's vital that we have those. As a forest ecologist, I can guarantee you that I can't fix the problems without those models.
Okay, Colleen, you just look like you're chomping away here to talk to us.
I guess what I'm thinking about is that just like the forest, this is a very complex problem, and where do you start and how do you explain it? And we all know that we're in a global environmental crisis, and even though we have governments that continue to talk about the Brundtland Report and the great changes and the agreements they're making worldwide to drastically move us into this new era, the business as usual is going on. In fact, we are living in an era of rapid industrial expansion and an industrial age, and we're not moving from that industrial era to the post-industrial era where we're supposed to be moving in terms of our thinking and the way we do business and the way we do things in this country. So I've spent the last 3 years a lot of my time in northern Canada, but also in the forests of British Columbia, documenting over $13 billion worth of new pulp mills that are expanding all across Canada. What that's going to bring on top of our existing crises, and we do have a crisis in the forests of the nation. Just for this province alone, we're going to have $3.5 billion worth of new pulp mill development. So on top of our clear cutting of 1,000 square miles a year, we're going to now have all these new mega projects. And it's like we haven't learned any lessons of the mess that we're in. You can travel to eastern Canada and they don't have any large wilderness areas left. They have little remnants and little pockets of wilderness. And I spent 6 months in a van traveling across Canada looking at the forest issues. And the further east I went, I found myself in places in Ontario and Quebec going, what were the forests like before? What did they used to look like? What was the original forest? You know, now we have hardwoods on the East Coast. At one time there were big old pine forests, ancient old trees that they'll never ever see again. And you'll find these little pockets left. And what we have when you come further east or further west into British Columbia, we have some of the finest old remnants of forests left. They're pockets in many ways, but we have whole valleys that we can still save, that we can set aside as wilderness areas. Even though we are devastating and trashing this province in terms of the short-term monetary profits of the multinational companies, we have an opportunity to do things differently in this province. And in many, many places of the world, they can't do that. So I look at our spectacular areas that are being lost daily, and we have always promises of change when in fact things have escalated so that industry is pulling out all the stops to get the last forested areas. And you're seeing a rapid expansion and push in these last areas such as Lasca Creek. It's not that these wilderness areas are the last places they have to log. They have to learn to do business differently. The corporations have to learn to do business differently. And what I see as the problem is it's us as the people for our short-term profits, but it's also through all the things that we do with our lives, the consumption, watching the television, the distraction that we all have in our lives, we're ignoring the problems, and in fact the problems are very real. NASA is now moving, there's a report came out last year by NASA, a scientific report that states that the northern forest is probably the greatest contributor to stopping global warming. And at the same time as this major scientific documents are coming out and the scientists are all telling us we may not survive the northern boreal forest with global warming, we're looking at losing 40% of the forest. They're saying that's over almost half of that forest is going to go up in smoke. And what we're having is government approving without any kind of hearings all of these pulp mill developments. So it's like, let's get the bucks out quick. That mentality is still going on. You can look at what's happening in British Columbia, even though we have a new government. It shows you the power the industry has, that areas like Lasca Creek don't even get a planning process. The Valhalla Society has put forward 122 new park proposals that we've collected from all the grassroots groups in the province. And what we have happening, we're finding out the industry is now focusing on that meager 3.5% of the productive forest land that we're asking for parkland and pushing in logging roads all over the place. And governments aren't doing anything to stop it. So we have, our technology is expanded so that it is out of control. And it's going to be up to communities and people to recognize that we are, of course, are also going to have very high unemployment, as they call it, the fall down effect, which is basically they've logged almost to the last stick in terms of what they would call the easy growing trees, and we have to rapidly change the way we allow business to be done in this province, or we won't have any wilderness left, but we also won't have a future in the forest industry at all. We'll be like the state of Alabama, where once they cut the forest down, there weren't forestry jobs for 50 years. And as they're logging day and night to get out the short-term profits, and that mentality is continuing, we're basically depriving our future of an economy as well as wilderness areas. So I see the problems on many, many levels. And yet I also believe that we are the generation to turn things around. And things like the ozone problem, the greenhouse effect, you go outside, and how are we going to tell our children they can't swim in Slocan Lake this summer in the heat of the day because of the causes of the ozone depletion? How are we going to tell our children that they have to stay inside in this beautiful wilderness area? Nature is going to throw back the problems that we've created, and if we don't get a handle on it, nature will do that for us. And I'm saying that we're an intelligent society, and we're also a caring society in many ways, that we have a chance to turn things around.
Thank you. Strong messages.
It seems to me that the problem, well, it starts with the planet itself. For 3 or 4 billion years, it's been evolving and developing a network, an interconnecting web. And there's a communication that goes through all the members of this giant community. What we've done in the middle of that is forget the messages that are coming from the planet and get caught up in our own version of things, which has economics as the bottom line, which rarely recognizes other human values, much less ecological values or environmental values. We've come to get separated from that whole world that nourishes us. And we've started to believe that the only way we can be is what we were told to be, which is competitive and consumptive, and this is the way to live. The planet hasn't forgotten about us. As we work on those natural areas, they are truly the nature of the earth, untrammeled. As we take them away, the balance is being upset, not only in the planet, but also inside of humanity, because you can't separate the two. We're learning now that there's a connection between our insides and the planet's insides, and between us and each other, that we're not separated. All this is coming down on us right now because it's, as Colleen puts it, the planet's way of telling us that we can't keep acting like that anymore. There's plenty of signs coming from the atmosphere, from the waters, from the lands, that we have overstepped the balance that the planet worked so hard to establish in the first place. It's no accident that the salinity of the ocean, it get to a particular degree or level and then stopped and provided the home for things to grow. There's a wonderful intelligence going on this planet that we're ignoring in our short-term economic, me first kind of attitudes. At the beginning I said we're in a time when we're changing attitudes. The governments, the companies, it's real hard for them to change. They have an economic bottom line, a quarterly report, and all that artificial reality that many people call real world, that artificial reality that they have to answer to. I feel that we're waking up inside. Each of us is learning to care and seeing the results of thoughtlessness coming back in our faces. And that battle is going on inside of each of us. When it comes to wilderness, if we don't, as Herb says, keep the pieces, if we don't take a Lasca Creek and set it aside, if we don't have places for people to go and relearn the values that the indigenous peoples all over the world know, then we're going to get more and more out of touch, more and more dependent upon our own circular thinking that's taking us right down the drain. It's not that it's hopeless. It's wonderful, because what's coming up is people standing in the road, is people working with extreme dedication as communicators to try and put these things across. And this is what's happening and where we are right now. The problems are in us, that we've forgotten that we're all in this together. And the solutions we can get to in a minute, but everybody's talking about the same thing. What's happening is that we're waking up and learning, with the help of people who've experimented more and tried more, how to put the pieces back in balance again.
Mm-hmm. This is a long-term historical recovery program here.
There is only the long term. The short term, we've sold.
Said in a slightly different way, if you think about how, to follow up on what Peter's saying, is that the problem, nobody feels very good right now in society, because all you have to do is peek around the corner and somebody either tells you that the climate's going to warm, or you need to wear a hat this summer, or you peek around another corner and somebody's throwing something at you because they think you're going to take their job away from them, or you're throwing something at someone else because you think you're going to lose wilderness that is valuable to you. And if we stop for a minute and think about the fact that we're relating to each other in trying to solve the problems in the same way that we're relating to the earth, in other words, we're not only trying our best to destroy the system that sustains us, but we're even trying to destroy each other in the process. And so we have to get out of this trap, this sort of well of confrontation and destruction that we've fallen into, and start trying the basis to cooperate with each other, to find that basis. And when we find the basis of cooperating with each other, we'll find that that means cooperating with the earth and cooperating with the Gaia that Peter described so well. So we need to understand that the way we relate to each other is the way we relate to the earth. And if we change one, both things will change, and we'll find solutions instead of problems.
I think on a local level, the problem is in a sense, it's identifying the problem. And if one identifies Lasca as a symbol of endangered wilderness and that disconnection of people from the Gaia, from the earth, then you're faced with having to make a choice and a decision in your life on a whole bunch of levels. And when we exist in society removed from the natural environment, I think we have an artificial feeling about things in a certain sense. And from my point of view, having become active in trying to identify areas and have them set aside for study, for wilderness preservation, it's a community involvement thing that doesn't have anything to do with being paid. It doesn't have anything to do with your job, and it makes a certain demand on your time. And there's a community involvement that happens at that I think, I know in myself, there's a part of me that cries out for some kind of community involvement that isn't a self-serving thing where it's going to increase your material values, pay your mortgage.
It's all about the human connections that make a community a living organism.
And I think what we saw happen last summer throughout the province with contentious areas, that in a sense is the earth speaking through people for its protection, saying, let's stop and look at this. And it isn't something that anybody does or did, it's just something that happened. And I think that voice is getting stronger all the time. And I think as that voice gets stronger, we have to face up to the fact that the other level, the wheel, the historical gross national product wheel, the way the Forest Service operates, is going to continue to roll along, and there's going to be a lot of pressure there. And that I believe that people are going to have to really stand up in the future for their children, for ourselves, and say, we got to slow down and we got to have a look here. And recently, I believe our government has just denied us that opportunity to have a look. And that is a whole area of problems about process and people's involvement, and not listening to a community that's trying to speak out.
So with all of you talking about what the problem is, there's recurring themes that come out. And one, I'm really impressed by what a sense of history everyone here seems to have in their identifying or grappling with what the problem is. And I'm wondering if that is a step towards your working together right now and working in the different communities about trying to get at what solutions there might be around. Has that been a big factor with that? Peter, it sounds like it's a very big part of your long-term plans.
The history?
Yeah, a sense of that it hasn't always been this way, that it is in no ways a naturally evolving part that's gone on, a very strong sense of people have made it like this.
Well, 500 years ago, Columbus came to the Americas, and we're celebrating that this year.
Some people are celebrating, yeah.
Well, celebrating it in different ways, I should say. I just came back from Costa Rica. They're making a movie down there about it, and they're trying to describe Columbus's dilemma as he brought European technology and the attitudes that went with it, the domination, the consumerism and all that came back then. They're trying to make a movie showing this guy as an all right guy who was in a human dilemma. Well, we're in that dilemma. 500 years later, what we've done is now evidenced. In Costa Rica, there are no more trees outside of the parks and private reserves. They've done this drama that we have in BC already. What they found was that they could do it at the cost to the ecosystem itself. So now they've tried to go around and say, what do we do now? I feel like with each person here, we've spent a lot of time trying to research and find out for ourselves what's going on and what are some of the issues involved. Every person right here has been working for years to get an appreciation. The reason they come here to do a television program is to share the synthesis of all that labor in some phrases and sentences so that other people can appreciate those perspectives faster and change and understand and act on it, as Paul says too. It's us that have to learn, and we can make the changes. This is what's happening.
Is that part of your work, Colleen, with working towards a post-industrial?
I think the alternatives are very important, but at the same time, I think you have to wake the public up, and the realities are that you have to recognize and expose the problem. And a lot of people can't connect. They know there's something wrong. They're just new at starting to work on the issue. So you also can't be afraid to call it as it is. And you can't put icing on massive devastation that's going on. So I believe you have to expose the crises, expose the problem, lay all those facts on the table. And I believe a lot of us know what those facts are and what the problems are. And then I think you work on the solutions, and it sort of has to all go hand in hand. And there are, I think the success, I believe that will happen will be at the grassroots in the community. It's people like the people at Lasca Creek who are having to stand up on the road and go to hundreds and hundreds of meetings on planning processes that lead nowhere, doing media work, going door to door in your community, selling t-shirts. All of those things interconnect so that you integrate everyone's talent into something so strongly and so powerful a movement. And you put that grassroots together, no matter how many millions of dollars you're fighting industry who are putting millions into putting out a message that everything's fine in Canada and in particular British Columbia. No matter what those millions are, movements are much more powerful. And I also believe it doesn't take a lot of people to make changes. It takes dedicated people, and it takes a lot of energy and time and volunteer time. But you always end up, when you're working on these issues, you think you're at a dead end and you're going to lose. And in some cases, I've seen losses, like the Old Man River filling up and a dam happening. Is an example of a tragedy that people who've worked for years have to sit and watch right now. But to know that we're doing all we can to make the change, and sometimes that might be your only outcome, that you keep working on it. And I have a lot of faith in communities and grassroots networks and people. There's some wonderful people out there working, and that's an inspiration for me. No matter how horrible the issues are, and I believe it's going to get more difficult out there, there's just a wonderful network of people coming together across this country.
So is that part of a solution that all of you are working with, out of this idea of networking and community groups and a sharing of information, kind of generating a radical, shit-disturbing database in some ways.
Well,
Is that part of the solutions as such, or is that just part of a recognition of a process that seems to be necessary?
Well, I think recognizing the process is part of the solution, and that until a group of people can come together, and they don't all have to agree, but there are stakeholders, and when the stakeholders come together and they can sit down and talk on a local level, then I think you're going to identify what the local problems are, because the local problems are the global problems. And I think in this area, we're blessed with an opportunity that there are people, a lot of people here that are feeling committed and making time for public involvement programs about our land use issues. And I know that not all the views at the table are sympathetic, but until they're aired out and the decision-making process ultimately becomes a local one, we'll end up with decisions like on Lasca Creek, which came from a central government and is too far removed from the community to really be functional in a real way.
What we have is a man who's written a book and spent years trying to get information about the wholeness of the forest and how it works into people's hands. We have a woman that's worked for 17 years or more trying to find out the intricacies of the politics and the issue, how much forest that we're losing. The real numbers, not the ones we're sold in the newspapers. This isn't radical and shit disturbing. This is informative, educational, supportive of a needed change. So it's really important that you be able to see the positive side of this, that it's constructive to bring the issues to light and constructive to seek solutions together.
Okay.
That's what we're doing.
Okay. Okay, how about I just open it though as is part of the solution though to create a network or a database, because that's what it sounded like. Or do you want the radical part in there?
Where are we in the program?
First of all, I think it's really important to understand in solutions here that people and forests that we're part of are viewed as problems by centralized institutions, whether you're talking about government, whether you're talking about large corporations, for that matter, even when you're talking about regional government that's quite a ways away from the communities that it purports to represent.
What do you mean they're seen as problems? Can you tell me what you mean?
I'll give you a very simple word that all of us have come to accept, called management. We have people managers, we have forest managers. Go to your dictionary and look up what the word management means. Management means manipulation. So it means power over, it means control of. So when you're looking at people management, you hire public relations specialists to manage people, to manage information. You hire people who have control over other people within a bureaucracy or within a corporation, not to encourage their creativity, not to ask them for the solutions, but to make sure that they understand what the solution is. And that's a solution that's imposed from the top down. That's perhaps a strident view of it, but even in the most benevolent form, there is no way that 5 well-meaning people who live in Vancouver and Victoria can resolve the problems like Lasca Creek or Hasty Creek in the Slocan Valley, nor is there really any way that I, living in the Slocan Valley, can come to Lasca Creek and solve the problems for the people that live there. The people that live there, loggers, shopkeepers, environmentalists, people, whatever labels we want to put on them, have got to be given the power, devolved the power from centralized institutions to come together under a framework that ensures that the first priority is to both protect each other and to protect the earth, and be allowed the human dignity to go through a creative process to develop solutions. Until we do that, it won't work. You can have all the centralized solutions you want, and I guarantee you, in the final analysis, people will reject them. They will either end up with a blockade of loggers, or a blockade of wilderness advocates, or a bunch of other, a potpourri of all of them perhaps someday. So we should learn the lessons of what's going on in the world right now. The Central European or Eastern European governments collapsed for perhaps some human reasons, but they also collapsed as a symbol of the fact that centralized institutions aren't working anymore. And we need to wake up and realize how precarious our own centralized institutions are.
So would either of you or any of you like to talk about that core process that's the core panel that's going around now, and talk about how that may or may not fit in then with Herb's, your view on political involvement by community? Colleen?
Well, the core process was set up basically to resolve conflict and confrontation in this province. So what we were all expecting was to have things done very differently in this province. What we're finding out is that Stephen Owen has been duped, basically. What's happening is that the core process is set up, and yet the same old industrial foresters are deciding where areas should be logged and where logging should take place. An example is Lasca Creek, which doesn't even get a core process. So we're realizing that in all these log-around strategies, we're getting logging within the park proposals. In fact, we're losing significant wilderness that should be under study right now. So the core process, it's sort of like this isolated process out there that by the time Stephen Owen gets set up, there won't be anything left. And at this time, when I see what's happening with the Parks 90 process, the Forest Commission process that happened, the roundtable process, the Parks 90 process missed of our 122 proposals. Ironically, they missed after major, just incredible public input in this province. They missed of the 122 proposals, they missed 73 of those areas, are not in their key park proposals that are long-standing, that have been before government for almost 15 to 20 years, are not even considered. So then we have Stephen Owen. It's like Harcourt has said, Stephen, you look after everything in this province, and we don't want to even, we were elected by not saying anything, and we don't plan on saying anything when we're elected, now that we're in power. And we do, and if you could see Stephen Owen, he's quite small man, and you just look at him, he's been given all the forest industry, all the environmental problems, native problems, and all the land in British Columbia. And he's saying, well, I have to wait till government makes some decisions on these things. So I'm afraid that Stephen Owen is going to be used by this government, and unfortunately I've worked within this party for years and have little faith if they don't change the bureaucracy when we have the same old bureaucrats who've been in bed with industry for many years. So Stephen Owen has to do more than he's doing, and he needs to speak out just like people who were working on, and I know he's been involved with Amnesty International, spoke out for what was happening in Africa. We also have to be speaking out for wilderness, and it's not good enough for him to sit in a room in Victoria and say, well, the cabinet has to make a decision on these areas. Otherwise, he's going to be in there for 5 years and nothing.
Right. So how do we increase what is part of the solutions then for our viewers listening to everyone here today and who want to do something? What should they do? Do they contact Stephen Owen? What kinds of things can they do as part of our working towards solutions? Do they work with existing community groups, or do they lobby politically, or do they just use whatever skills they have? Any ideas for?
I could comment on that. One thing that people could do is to contact the West Arm Land Use Forum, which is a group of stakeholders in this area that is attempting to find some solutions to this, or at least identify what the issues are and come up with some kind of a land use value and principles paper as a beginning point. That's one thing that people can do. I think another thing that people can do is support various wilderness organizations in their job of educating the public of the value of saving wilderness. But I think the local thing here is to get together with other people and begin by talking with each other.
I want to add a couple of things to that.
Yeah, please do.
By the way, we could probably talk for several days about
We have 10 more minutes.
One of the most important things that I think people should demand is open, balanced information. And I think we don't know the real information on which the Lasca decision was purportedly made. It wasn't made by local people. Are we going to accept one politician saying there was nowhere else to go? As a forest ecologist and a forester, I can tell you that I don't see it that way. And I'd certainly like to see that information before I accept that. But you know, the most important piece of information that Canadians and across the country, and in particular British Columbians, are being denied is the fact that in the last 5 years there has been an information revolution in how forests work. We quite simply know that what we're doing today is bankrupt. It does not work. I can put you in a room with any number of preeminent scientists who will verify that. But somehow or another, our forest industry, the way we plan wilderness, the way we justify jobs, is all being supported by this bankrupt information, or at least this information, to not use that term so strongly, this information that has been superseded by better information. We should demand in our schools, in our public forums, in our planning exercises, that this technical information form the basis for the way we plan and use forests. And if we did that, we would find that we could generate 3 or 4 times the number of jobs that we do right now for each tree we cut. If we did that one thing, we probably wouldn't be sitting here in this studio today. We could be out walking in the wilderness that would leave behind, learning how forests operate and reconnecting ourselves. So information has been badly twisted and ignored in this process.
Peter, I think you were...
I'll keep it short. Herb's cited information as something that we could improve on, and I sure would appreciate that. And something else I think that we could start to do as a people and as a bureaucrat and as a forester and as the government even, is admit that we're wrong. Nobody ever does. All the acts, the road shows that are touring the province, asking the people what they want, including Stephen Owen and his mediation skills, is trying to resolve a conflict without admitting that it was started by wrong thinking. That the way we exploit each other, the forest, the world, is wrong. And we can't build something right if we're doing it wrong. If we could admit that, it would change our personal lives, because then we'd look for a way to make it better. Now we're trying to justify my job or the way I think or the way we do things, and it doesn't work. So if we could just admit that we were wrong together and start figuring out how to come back in balance again, it would make a big difference.
Rousing statements.
It's true, because we are still in denial. And it's like everyone's saying there's no problem, nothing's wrong. And in fact, the opposite is happening. I think another very important thing that the public can do is that they have to become more involved in their issues in their community. And even though you start out, you might not know anything about a forest in terms of all the technical jargon that's, tree farm licenses, PSYUs. I have a whole list of things that I didn't know when I started, but it just takes getting involved, and in a very short time, people, once they're informed, know what has to be done, and they have their eyes start to open, and they begin once they start to work on an issue. And then there's an incredible amount of energy when new people become involved. So we're going to need that support. We need a large public outcry. If we're going to save this planet, we need people to become involved in their communities. There are a number of environmental groups. It doesn't have to be West Arm, which is one. There's the Valhalla Society. There's the Watershed Alliance. There's all kinds of organizations. But in particular at this time, I think the Lasca Creek and the West Arm wilderness people need an incredible amount of help, and it's going to take people from all over this province helping out saving the Lasca Creek area.
Any closing comments, Paul?
Well, yeah, I would like to close on about the question of denial. Stephen Owen's process, I think, for it to be real, has to address the issue of at its core of the present cutting level of our forests. that the present cutting level in our forests at this time is creating all of these problems and destroying our wilderness. And that's what I would ask him to do.
Do you think that's linked in with part of the attempts to open up this process, this idea of greater information and a different value placed on differing types of information?
I think it's a process where the communities have to say this is what we need and ask him and get assistance in implementing that. If communities are dictated to on an agenda or a plan, then it ceases to be a local issue again. And that is something that's going to be very difficult and tricky for government to get out of. Even with a good intention. That is an old standing pattern that we have. We've been sitting around very comfortably for centuries now, having other people far away making real basic decisions for us. And now we're faced with what Peter was saying, a lot of really bad decisions were made. Not to blame on anybody for lack of information and knowledge, if nothing else. But we are having to live and deal with that now.
People have to take back responsibility.
Yeah.
I find it quite inspiring that everyone has been involved and so involved for such a long time, and that you still show no signs of flagging.
We have times of
No
Well,
kidding.
look at our gardens.
True indicator of neglect,
Dead
right?
houseplants.
Yeah.
I think if we have anything else that you would like to bring up, now is the time to do it. I'm not sure
We're going to talk specifically about Lasca Creek. Are we getting
We
to
could.
that?
I have a 2-minute warning, but I know we can slice tapes.
I think Lasca Creek needs to be zeroed in on, which
Okay, Paul, do you want? Would you like me to ask you?
Well, from my point of view and from the West Arm Wilderness Group's point of view, to preempt any kind of a public process and creating a situation for a study for this area to continue on the Forest Service agenda for the area is an unacceptable situation.
So as it stands now, Lasca has been removed from that core review process.
That's correct.
So what does that mean for the immediate future of Lasca? Business as usual, as
Yeah.
Colleen referred to it?
Yeah.
it doesn't even get studied for a park proposal. So what we're recognizing is that Lasca is the first to fall of many park proposals, and if we don't get moratoriums on those park proposals, the roads will be pushed up before the public wake up.
I think the fundamental thing to come back to that all of us have touched on is that first of all, before they can approve logging to go ahead in Lasca Creek, the information has to be presented to the public that justifies it both in terms of the lack of a log around area, that justifies it ecologically, in the fact that we have areas that are equal to or replacements for Lasca in this area, not in Prince George, not in Ontario, but here in this ecosystem. We're entitled as people to an explanation and a justification, and then we're also entitled to a share in that decision. And until that happens, I think it should stop, because otherwise it's going to result in chaos here.
Exactly. Peter, a closing word from you? Thank you all.
Yeah, I think so. What Colleen referred to as denial, that happens to be one of the first two stages, anger and denial, of dying. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross calls it dying, and what's dying is the old way of doing things, and as it happens we start fighting and getting angry and denying that anything is wrong. And then we come into the stages of more understanding and eventually acceptance that we have to come together, and that's exactly what we have to do.
Okay. All right. Well, I thank you all very much today for our discussions on wilderness and on our values. And I know it'll be continuing. I hope we can do this again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila.
And we're over time. Is Michael going to kill us?